The March of 1965 saw the year's main event. The Vietnam War was a military conflict between the Communist forces of North Vietnam, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and the non-Communist forces of South Vietnam, supported by President Lyndon B. Johnson's American government. Over 3,000 United States Marines were dispatched to South Vietnam. Their mission was to provide security for the Da Nang Air Base. By doing so, they would allow South Vietnamese troops to handle other areas of battle. The Vietnam War began in 1959. The country had been divided, with a communist government in the north under Ho Chi Minh and a democratic government in the south under Ngo Dinh Diem. Ho Chi Minh launched a brutal guerrilla campaign in South Vietnam, led by Viet Cong soldiers, with the goal of uniting the country under communist rule. It would prove to be the longest military conflict in US history. Initially, the United States had little interest in Vietnam, but was worried the world would become dominated by the Soviet Union and its allies. America became involved, believing that if the entire country fell under communist rule, communism would eventually spread throughout Southeast Asia, the domino theory. On March 8, 1965, America sent in its own troops to save the South Vietnamese government from collapse. In August of 1964, the American destroyer USS Maddox had been attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin while conducting an intelligence mission. It led to US airstrikes against North Vietnam. To protect American air bases in South Vietnam, over 3,000 Marines were deployed, becoming the first ground forces committed to the conflict. More troops soon followed. General Westmoreland, commander of the US Military Assistance Command, ordered the first offensive ground operation of the war. Launching large-scale search and destroy operations, American and Allied forces targeted Viet Cong operating bases. Following these defeats, the North Vietnamese avoided fighting conventional battles. Turning to so-called guerrilla methods, they focused on attacking smaller groups of US troops in the sweltering jungles of South Vietnam. At the height of the American involvement, there were more than 500,000 of their military personnel in Vietnam. In January 1968, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong launched what would later be known as the Tet Offensive. Planned to coincide with the celebration of the Chinese Lunar New Year, they successfully launched a series of coordinated attacks on major American-occupied South Vietnamese towns and military posts. Beginning with an assault on US Marines at Khe Sanh, the attacks were intended to begin a rebellion against America and her allies, including Australia and South Korea. However, although the Viet Cong's attacks took Allied forces by surprise, they were contained. After the Tet Offensive, new US President Richard Nixon began plans to end American involvement, including building up the Army of the Republic of Vietnam so that they could fight the war themselves. US troops started to return home, but despite a peace treaty signed by all parties in January 1973, fighting continued until North Vietnam secured a communist victory with the fall of Saigon. The Vietnam War had a major impact on US culture, with the American people deeply divided over their government's reasons for sending them to war. The will of the Vietnamese people was too strong, and the war demonstrated that no one, not even a nation like the United States, could defeat such strength of national spirit.